UCLA, winless, had not been in the lead versus anybody all year, took down Penn State in the Rose Bowl. That was an incredible performance by UCLA, but I think I'm going to have to start with Penn State because that's where the conversation is going to be. This was the preseason number 2 team in the country, bringing back a lot of veterans, and the expectations could not have been higher for Penn State. And now all of a sudden, all hell has broken loose for the Nittany Lions. Back-to-back losses, an emotional whiteout loss overtime to a really good Oregon team that all of us believe is one of the best teams in college football. And listen, what was the conversation? It was more about Penn State continues to lose these type of matchup games. But what they had not done, and everyone knows this, is they had not lost to teams that they should beat. They hadn't done it. Really, their last loss in a situation like this was the 9 overtime game in 2021 against Illinois. This was tried and true. James Franklin had gotten them over this hump of losing the inexplicable game. It was the games that meant everything that we were wanting to see Penn State take a step forward. And here, what we have is the classic trap game. I answered this question last week about trap games. And really, I said there's 2 ways you can have a trap game in college football. The more classic one is the Texas version at Florida, which we'll talk about in a moment. But this is the one that's a little more sneaky, where you have a really emotional loss or win, just an emotional game where you've got to expend 100% of your energy, emotional energy, everything in it. And then all of a sudden, the result of that game lingers. And it can happen if you win or lose that game. But in this case, it was a loss that Penn State suffered at home, and then it lingered. And you could clearly see during the course of that game that team was not as prepared as it needed to be to go out there and play even UCLA, a team that was 0-4, had fired both coordinators, fired their head coach, and had nothing to lose. That is a classic trap. In fact, it happened a few years ago after Ohio State had beaten Penn State. I believe it was in 2017. Saquon Barkley took the opening kickoff back, and Ohio State claws back, and it's this big emotional win. Crowd storms the field afterwards. J.T. Barrett, just an incredible comeback in that game. And then the next week, Ohio State went out and lost to Iowa on the road at Iowa. And again, that's kind of that classic trap game. This was that for Penn State. Not trying to give them any excuses, but you're on the road, team that you don't respect, and all of a sudden, they're in a ball game. And UCLA emptied the bucket. I loved UCLA, their plan, everything about what they did. And again, I want to give them their flowers, and I will do that right after I evaluate what's gone on at Penn State. Let's start on the offensive side of the football. Even though they were able to claw back and get within a score of that game, and we'll talk about their defense, there's no doubt. But this offense is where I think the lion's share of the criticism lies. And that's because their quarterback, Drew Allar, has been at the middle of a lot of these games where their fan base feels like they come up short. And I'll just say this about Penn State's offense, and I said this last week as well. When I watch their offense, what they're trying to run and the pieces they're trying to run it with aren't fitting right now. And they've got to figure that out. And they better figure that out quickly now with 2 losses. Their backs are clearly up against the wall. Talented pieces that it's just not working. So they have to go back to the drawing board and try to look at what do our players do best and how can we best put them in those positions to succeed. That's really what a coach's job is. That's what they have to do right now because it's not working. And certainly on Saturday, that was the case. This is what I think is telling about Penn State is that when you look at the last 2 weeks and you look at what the game plan was, I'm talking about base downs, first half, what they spent their entire week in preparation getting ready to do, it has not worked. It didn't work against Oregon in the first half, and it certainly didn't work against UCLA in the first half. And you can't just chalk this up to like, well, they weren't ready to play. That is a way that like a fan can describe it, and I don't want to disparage fans, but I will just tell you that something in the plan is not working. Because you can prepare yourself schematically for success. And we saw UCLA do that on the opposite side. But that's not happening at Penn State. You look at the first 2 halves, each of the last 2 weeks, Oregon and then UCLA. really, really bad. First half versus Oregon, 69 yards, 92 versus UCLA. Like you cannot come out and play that poorly when you're trying to execute a plan that has been built over the entire week. That's it. That is a problem. So again, it goes back to fit. And again, it goes back to like, what do we do best schematically? And what do our players do best? What can they execute? And then that marriage needs to happen. There was obviously what I feel like were some calls that they're going to want back from a play calling perspective, namely that fourth down play that they ran on 4th and 2, down a score, and they run the quarterback read power with Drew Allar. And it's like, listen, man, this is not Tim Tebow. This is not Cam Newton. This is Drew Allar. He is a classic pocket passer. Just because he can run for 4 or 5 first downs a game, which he did, doesn't mean that he is a running threat. And so when you've got, Katron Allen and Nick Singleton, and you've got a run game that you feel like you can lean on and all this experience on the offensive line, I think you need to go in a different direction. And I thought they would have learned that lesson last year in a huge game against Ohio State when they had 1st and goal, down a score inside the 5-yard line, and Tyler Warren didn't touch the ball. In the most critical moments of the game, your best player has to touch the football. Now, you can argue that might have been Drew Allar. Then you might have a point, because Penn State fans, this might come as a bit of a shock. I've watched every play. And what if I told you, Penn State fans, that the best player in a Penn State uniform on Saturday against UCLA was Drew Allar? Would you agree with that? Because if you just read the articles, or if you're on the chat boards and you read what's being said, you would think that the problem is Drew Allar. I don't think that that's accurate. I don't think that that's accurate at all. In fact, I believe and I know that Drew Allar was the best Nittany Lion on the field on Saturday, and he was, in a wide respect, the only reason that Penn State had a chance to win that football game in the first place. And that's even being in an offense and trying to execute scheme that he's not necessarily fit to execute. That dude plays hard. Now, that's not enough, and I'm not suggesting he was perfect either. Okay, so I don't want to get the two conflated, because no one played great for Penn State, but he was certainly the reason that they were in that game. And I believe that the criticism coming his way is not appropriate. Now, it's always going to be there. And as a former quarterback, I understand uniquely, and I'm fully aware that the quarterback is always going to get more credit than he should when the team is playing well, and he's going to get more criticism than he should when the team does not play well. So listen, that's what you sign up for. And I know Drew would say that as well. I've talked to him before. Like, he understands that, and all of us that played that position understand that. But I'm here to tell you, as an outside observer, and I know what I'm looking at, Drew was not the problem on Saturday. He just wasn't. And in fact, he was playing outside of the X's and O's several times just in order to get the team to where it was, scrambling for first downs because the offensive line played very poorly. They didn't run the ball well. The wide receivers are not playing well. Let me just give you a couple of examples. He had 5 rushing first downs versus UCLA. He had 4 rushing first downs versus Oregon, and a lot of those are when things break down. Now, when that happens, there are 2 ways or reasons why a quarterback has to rush for a first down when things break down. Either he doesn't know what he's looking at and he just utilizes his legs to get out and to escape. That's not the case with Allar. He knows what he's looking at. His eyes are in the proper place, at least the way that it looks to me. And here's what he's looking at. He's looking at a wide receiver core right now that continues, even with different players in a rebuilt roster, continues to be an underperforming unit. And I'm not just talking about the stat sheet, because remember, as a quarterback, I don't care who catches the football, and neither does Drew. Okay? Julian Sayin doesn't care who catches the football. Here's what a quarterback actually cares about. Pictures. Are they clean? Are they on time? Do you create, and Bill Belichick said this, I believe it was in the Indianapolis Super Bowl when they played against the Giants and Eli the second time. I remember I was sitting there, I was doing Radio Row at the time at a station in Denver. I hadn't moved to LA and hadn't started my more national job with Fox. And I was doing a local radio show in Denver, and we went to Radio Row, and we sat in on some of the coaches' press conferences that they had with our obviously our press credentials. And he was asked about wide receiver play. Because you remember, like, wide receiver play, apart from Randy Moss, New England never really prioritized wide receivers. And he said, listen, there's really only two things that I care about with a wide receiver. Can you create separation, and do you catch the ball? Right? And then I would add a third as like an offensive guy, is like, are you on time and creating separation? Here's what I'm seeing with UCLA's wide receivers Penn State's wide receivers. They do not get open. They do not run with urgency. The speed with which they play is a notch too slow. They cannot get off of bump coverage, so they're jammed constantly at the line of scrimmage if that's the technique that the defense is playing. Thus, the picture is late. Thus, Allar's got nowhere to throw the football. And then he's got to escape the pass rush, which is generally in his lap because the offensive line is underperforming. And several times he escaped as not a guy that's going to threaten you with his mobility, but just with sheer courage and competitiveness. He got those first downs. Again, he ran for 5 first downs. Not all of those designed. In fact, very few of them. 3 or 4 of those are just him competing, moving the chains. All right, because when he's looking down the field, he sees guys that are not running hard, jammed, covered. That's a problem. That's a problem. There was even a play late in that ball game where it looks like he overthrows the tight end on a little wheel route into the end zone. And obviously that's a touchdown that they desperately needed. And I'm sure a Penn State fan would have said to themselves like, oh, Allar's got to hit that. And yes, he does. But he's not the only variable in that equation. He's not. Now, you got to put it on him, and I understand that. But he's also throwing to a spot, and he's got to assume that once his tight end gets a step and has leverage over the top of the defender, that he has to use speed to create the space. You got to go. You have won. The one thing you can't do as a pass catcher in that moment, once you've gotten a step past the defender and you're running down the field, is slow down. And the tight end slows down. Drew throws it to a spot he thinks he's going to be at. The tight end turns himself around, and it looks like it's overthrown. The ball was actually well thrown from Allar. These, I'm sure, sound like excuses. And I'm not trying to be any apologist here for Drew. He's got to play better at times. There's no doubt. There's no doubt. And he wasn't perfect. But Saturday was not on him. It was not on him. The offensive line was not good, and then the game plan was not good. Let me just give you a quick synopsis, and this is, again, what I saw. When I'm watching that film, I saw them try to run that stretch quarterback power that they did on 4th down one other time during the game, and it was all the way back in the first half. I believe it was the second quarter. It was the second quarter, actually. They were going left to right, and it was a 1st down in minus territory, 1st and 10. Okay, and they tried to run it, and the back was blown up, and he did not make a good read, and he gave it to the back, and it looked like the quarterback run maybe would have been there if he pulls in and takes it up the middle of the field. So on film, and they're watching on the iPads, I'm sure they think to themselves like, hey, we can get into that set again or run that concept again out of a different set, and maybe the quarterback run is going to be there. But it went for -7. Now, there were other short yardage opportunities that they had during the course of the game. A couple on 3rd down. I believe one of them was on 4th down, but a couple on 3rd down. They got into an unbalanced, or I would say power set into the short side of the field and just ran a toss sweep. You can go back and watch this, by the way, Penn State fans. Toss sweep, short yardage, short side of the field with linemen and tight ends in front, and they mauled UCLA. Easy first downs. You get into a second quarter, 4th and 2. And now it's 4th and 2, and it's like, okay, what's your 4th down plan during the course of the week? What is it? Especially 4th and short. Even with that offensive line, even with those running backs, you're Penn State, they're UCLA, you should be able to run for the first down. It's 4th and 2. And they get into a spread set, and they run a mesh concept where they got 2 drag routes trying to cross the field. Great versus man coverage, right? Absolutely. I would call it versus man coverage. There's no doubt. One problem, it's zone. You can't run mesh on 4th and 2 versus zone. So Allar sits back there. The mesh doesn't affect one defender whatsoever. He's got routes on the outside that are jogging off the line of scrimmage. They're not open, and he has to take a sack. And if I'm a Penn State fan watching at home, I'm probably thinking to myself like, oh, Allar, come on. Not his problem. Play call, terrible. Play execution, even worse. So these are the things that I see on film. Now you get to 4th and 2. The game is on the line. And I don't quite understand how you would go back to a play concept that got a -7 earlier in the game. I constantly, so Steve is with me here, and during the course of games when he's also with me in the booth, we will earmark plays during the course of the game. Always, every single week in the booth, we're constantly ticking off plays. I'm telling the truck down, our production truck, hey, they're going to come back to that. That was a successful play. That was a successful formation. In a big moment, they're going to need something late in the game. They're going to get back to what worked. What I don't understand is why we would go back to something that did not work, in particular at the biggest moment of the game. Now we get to the defense. I know that was a long dissertation, but again, like it was pretty bad. The film was for Penn State. You get to the defensive side of the football, they couldn't get a stop. Comebacks are like puzzles. They happen one piece at a time. And can you imagine if you're trying to do a puzzle and you're trying to put it together one piece at a time, right? And somebody, after you put a piece in, just comes on you over, maybe you got a little brother or something, a little turd, and he comes in and just pops a piece out and takes it and steals it, running to the other room. Are you ever going to be able to complete the puzzle? No. The answer is no. And that's exactly what happened on Saturday to Penn State. Every time the offense put another piece into that puzzle to come back, what happened? UCLA drove right down the field and scored. Penn State couldn't get a stop. They didn't tackle well in space. They didn't play well with their defensive line. Their defensive backs did not play physical. And Nico Iamaleava was brilliant. He was terrific. Looked like the 5-star quarterback that we all saw at moments against Tennessee, and then certainly showed up on Saturday against Penn State. He was a real threat. Reminded me of the first half against Ohio State in the college football playoff when he was really Tennessee's only offense running the football. And that's very similar to what he did against Penn State, and they could never get a stop. They couldn't get a stop when they needed it. Offense would get within a score, UCLA would extend the lead. Offense would get within a score, UCLA would extend the lead. And that's got to be absolutely maddening if you're a Penn State fan, if you're a player, and if you're Jim Knowles. You know, he was brought in there on a pretty hefty salary as a guy that has had a lot of success everywhere that he's been, going back to Duke as a defensive coordinator and Oklahoma State as a defensive coordinator, and obviously at Ohio State with what they were able to do, finishing number 1 in the country last year, and they couldn't get it done. You give up 42 to a team that was 134th in scoring offense coming in. I mean, that is a moment right there. So nothing worked for Penn State. Nothing. It is drawing board time for the Penn State Nittany Lions. So before we get into UCLA, the elephant in the room obviously is going to be Coach Franklin and James Franklin and everyone talking about his job. But here's the deal. He's not going to be worried about that right now, because what he's going to be worried about is all the things that I just discussed. And ultimately, and he knows this, and he even said so at the end of the day, he's going to be responsible for fixing all the things that I just described during that lengthy dissertation about his team. And that's going to be his charge, is to go through that and fix the things that are broken. And we'll see if they can do that moving forward. Thank you for watching the Joel Klatt Show YouTube channel. And if you liked this clip, make sure to like it and subscribe to the channel. And you can stay up to date on all of my college football coverage.